Hi class. In this section we're discussing the Middle East and particularly the media coverage of the Middle East from the US perspective, how we view the Middle East and how our understanding of this region is shaped by the media. We'll also cover some of the media phenomena that exist in the Middle East, such as the um, Al Jazeera as a big, so-called, CNN of the Middle East. Also, the use of media, social media by terrorist organizations such as the Islamic State, who are very big on Twitter and other social media, and so on and so on. It's a very big topic, but let me start with a disclaimer. Even the very term Middle East that we use in the United States is a misnomer, because it is purported to cover countries as wide ranging in their culture, in their history, in their political traditions as Tunisia all the way in the west to Afghanistan all the way in the east, as Turkey and Syria to the north, and Somalia and Yemen to the south. Those are very, very different countries. Those are very different people, and all kinds of traditions that are not similar at all. So lumping them together is not a good idea, except that we seem to have done it for quite a while. Uh, so we'll use the term Middle East for the time being, because it has been adopted as such. But I just want you to remember that it's not a homogeneous region. It's not the same culture. It's not the same people. Even the languages are not the same. Farsi in Iran and Iranians are not Arab. And then you have, of course, the Arabic language, but then you have also the use of other languages such as Swahili, and so on and so on. The Middle East has been part of the U.S. history for a long time, and I mentioned in my written lecture that in the 1790s and early 1800s, the United States government, particularly Thomas Jefferson, established institutions such as the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy for the particular reason of protecting the U.S. Trade routes going into the Mediterranean. The North African pirates were a huge threat at the time. So you see how far back this relationship goes, and it has been very complicated, very, very tangled. There are many perspectives and many things that have happened historically and politically in the relationship between the United States and Middle Eastern countries. Of course, we cannot forget about the largest strategic ally that the United States has in the region, which is Israel. Also controversial relationship in many ways. Our relationship with Saudi Arabia, very, very complicated. I mean, of course, Saudi Arabia is hardcore dictatorship, religious dictatorship, but it has been our ally for a variety of reasons, and this has been quite controversial, and so on and so on. But let's not go too much into politics. Let's stay with the media. You have plenty of readings in this section of the class that discuss how the United States audiences have been viewing the Middle East because of the media coverage. I talk, and the readings also address, the Iraq War, the disastrous Iraq War started by the Bush, George W. Bush's administration, and then problems that emerged after that, issues that happened, not the least because of wrong uh, perception of the region, precisely because of the lumping of all peoples in the region into one kind of faceless mass that is sometimes threatening to us here in the United States because of the threat of terrorism and so on and so on. Even now, as I'm recording this, the incoming administration of Donald Trump is considering instituting registry for all Muslims entering the United States, which of course would be completely outrageous. To put 1.7 billion Muslims, not all of them living in the Middle East, by the way. The largest Muslim country, Indonesia, is not in the Middle East. But lumping them together into one mass and assuming that just because you're Muslim, you're terrorist, that is a very dangerous proposition. The United States government has made many blunders with its relationship in the Middle East, in terms of media blunders, in terms of public relations gaffes. One example you can see from the movie documentary Control Room, which you already had in this class. I mean, for instance, the Iraqi Most Wanted deck of cards, and then of course Saddam Hussein as the Ace of Spades. Remember that one? Well, the Central Command based in Qatar announced that they have created this deck of cards and that they'll be using it for to capture Iraqi leaders and so on and so on. It was supposed to be distributed to the troops, but they did not make it available to the journalists, which is was complete blunder, and I cannot fathom why the government, as represented by the Central Command, the military, in this instance, would make such a silly error. The build-up to the Iraq War, again, which was covered by the documentary Control Room really well, was very interesting time with some major media, including the New York Times, being very uncritical of the claims of the administration at the time that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and so on and so on. The New York Times apologized a year later, so in May of 2014, 2004, they apologized for their support of the war, of the build-up to the war, but I guess it was already too late. So that's one interesting case study about how media can go wrong on something that in hindsight should have been so obvious, that whatever the government says is not always true. But again, the reason for that is the general erroneous attitude that many Americans have had toward the Middle East as one homogeneous mass, group of people that barely have any differences, and that probably all of them hate the United States and so on and so on, which is definitely not true. So one of the purposes of this class, of this section, is to dispel such notions and to allow you to see the Middle East as a very diverse region with different peoples, with different policies, very complex history, and unfortunately lots of bloodshed, lots of suffering that has been going on for quite a while. Another interesting aspect that I touch on in this section is the particularly skillful use of social media by terrorist groups or organizations such as the Islamic State at the present. They have been very good with Twitter. They have been very good with social media in general as a recruiting tool. They post their videos on YouTube. They have, again, social media pages, and this has been one of the major tools of their propaganda. In 2011, when the so-called um, Arab Spring started with a popular uprising, beginning first in Tunisia and then spreading east, all the way to Egypt, overthrowing regimes that have been in place for quite some time. Then the war in Syria, the civil war in Syria, starting at about the same time. Terrible tragedy that goes on as of now, with tens of thousands of people dead, and civilians being trapped between some 800 different factions fighting the government of Assad. So all that has been widely covered by the media in the United States and around the world, but because of the obvious threats to journalists, the danger that exists in reporting from war zones, information has been sometimes very sporadic and also inaccurate. Journalists have been attacked even in peacetime. Remember how reporters from a female reporter from NBC was harassed sexually at Tahrir Square in Egypt, in Cairo. You have a reading about that. So, and then of course reporters being kidnapped, killed by ISIS, by Al Qaeda, by various terrorist organizations, shot, because they were caught in crossfire, blown up in various bombings, and so on and so on. This has made the job of journalists very difficult and made the information quite inaccurate at times. Plenty of readings in this section, plenty of information that you can use, plenty of additional materials, and very complex area, very complex region with many competing interests, with many instances of violence, of suffering, of human stories that sometimes go beyond our wildest, worst imagination. Unfortunately, all this can be found in the Middle East, and I want you to gain a deeper understanding of this complexity. I want you to keep on reading, keep on being interested, not trusting the first information bits that you get. Understand that there is a lot of misinformation going on, and be able to understand the region for yourselves. Thank you.